Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show. I thought I would start today's episode with some literature, some more poetry from Charles Baudelaire on the subject of wine. I've mentioned previously that Stefan Molyneux and others are greatly distressed. Apparently, people in this time of panic are taking comfort in alcohol. And this poem by Charles Baudelaire is called The Wine of the Ragpickers. He wrote a series of poems on the subject of wine, which was later turned into a concert suite by Alban Berg. The translation is by Roy Campbell, and Campbell, like Baudelaire, was a great lover of wine. That he made a vow in 1936 that he would not touch another drop of alcohol until Franco took Madrid. And apparently he kept that vow until 1939, when the nationalists did indeed finally take Madrid. He told this story to his American publisher, Henry Regnery, and said that as soon as he found out the news about Madrid, he polished off a whole bottle of wine in one go, which Regnery, having become a friend of Campbell, said that he knew that he was quite capable of it. And he asked Regnery, "Do you know what it felt like?" And he said, "Angels going down my throat wearing velvet slippers." So here's the poem. Often in some red street lamp's glare, whose flame the wind flaps, rattling at its glassy frame, in the mired labyrinth of some old slum, where crawling multitudes ferment their scum, with judge-like nods, a ragpicker comes reeling, bumping on walls like poets without feeling, and scorning cops, now vassals of his state, begins on glorious subjects to dilate, takes royal oaths, dictates his laws sublime, exalts the injured and chastises crime, and spreading his own dais on the sky, is dazzled by his virtues, starred on high. Yes, these folk, badgered by domestic care, ground down by toil, decrepitude, despair, buckled beneath the foul load that each carries, the motley vomit of enormous Paris, come home, vat-scented, trailing clouds of glory, followed by veteran comrades, battle-hoary, like banners as each marches, flags, torches, flowers, and steep triumphal arches. Rise up for them in magic hues and burn. Through this dazzling orgy they return, while drums and clarions daze the sun above, with glory to a nation drunk with love. Thus wine through giddy human life is rolled, like Pactolus, a stream of burning gold. Through man's own throat, his exploits it will anchor, God in remorse made sleep. Man added wine, child of the sun, immortal and divine. So, let's get back to the main part of the show. And let's start with some news of terror. This is from the London Sun. Terrifying video shows how a single cough can spread a cloud of coronavirus across supermarket that lingers 4 minutes. This terrifying animation shows how coronavirus particles from a single cough can hang in the air several minutes and spread across 2 aisles of a supermarket. Scientists created a computer simulation to study how far the virus can travel indoors, and worryingly found how a cloud of droplets will infect others even after the sick person has walked away. The scientists involved say that the best way to avoid catching the virus is to stay away from busy public spaces like shops and stations. Professor Ville Vuoren of Aalto University in Finland told the BBC, "If you go there, only go there seldom as possible. Stay there as short a time as possible." In a statement accompanying the video, the researcher said preliminary results indicate that aerosol particles carrying the virus can remain in the air longer than was originally thought. So it is important to avoid busy indoor public spaces. This also reduces the risk of droplet infection, which remains the main path of transmission for coronavirus. Extremely small particles of the virus do not sink on the floor, but instead move along in the air currents or remain floating in the same place. Oh dear. Also, from the London Sun, another horrific video shows coronavirus particles from runners can infect you even if you're 2 meters away. Currently, Brits are allowed to go for 1 run a day during coronavirus lockdown, so long as they stick to the strict social distancing measures. However, a shocking new animation has proved that the UK's 2 meter or 6 feet social distancing rule might not be enough to keep you safe during the pandemic if you're out jogging. It shows that as well as risking infecting other joggers, runners are also at risk of infecting people walking in the street, as well as cyclists. The experts say that because of this, running side by side could be less risky than in single file, as you are far less likely to be struck with any potentially infected fluids. If all this is true, then I just have to assume, as I've been saying for weeks, that pretty much every person on Earth has now been exposed to the coronavirus. Ooh, what's happening in New York? As New York City's fatalities from the new coronavirus increase and threaten to overwhelm the city's capacity to handle the dead, officials have begun to consider resorting to temporary burial sites just in case. Such internments would likely be at Hart Island off the Bronx, Mayor Bill de Blasio said. Councilman Mark Levine had raised the prospect earlier that burials may be done at city parks, but said later Monday that he's been assured that wouldn't be the case. A city protocol drafted in 2008 proposed interment solutions in the event of a catastrophe, resulting in too many fatalities for the city's morgue to handle. The medical examiner's planning document doesn't mention parks as potential sites, but city officials had discussed locating temporary burial grounds in fairly low traffic parks with open spaces. We are pretty full on capacity at temporary morgues and storage freezers now, so it could be imminent unless we have a significant drop-off in the number of deaths or an increase in capacity, Levine said. Although city officials say they're bracing for the pandemic's brunt, the health department recorded 219 new daily COVID-19 deaths Monday morning, down from 351 in the 24 hours between Saturday and Sunday. The 24 hours before that, there were 321. These totals don't include the spike in at-home deaths that are assumed to be virus-caused. Levine said the city's official count was 67,820 cases of COVID-19 and 2,475 fatalities as of Monday morning. Yes, apparently everyone is going to die, or this is what the authorities want people to believe, and not just in New York City. According to SCMP News, a Ukrainian city is digging graves to scare residents into taking lockdown measures seriously amid the COVID-19 pandemic. This is satanic. I can think of no other word to describe it. Let's see, someone named Gaia tweets in response to this, coronavirus mortality is 0.37%. Scientists explain the fact that the figure is 5 times lower than the 1.98% determined by the Johns Hopkins University, with the fact that the total number of all infected persons could be included. In the District of Columbia, the mayor, Muriel Bowser, according to The Hill, is directing all grocery stores and food markets in the city to require customers to wear face masks before entering. The order, which Bowser released on Twitter Wednesday night and discussed during a news conference Thursday, also requires all farmers markets in the city, including the DC seafood market, to apply for waivers in order to continue operations. Those waivers will only be granted to markets that provide plans for enforcing the social distancing guidelines. Customers will additionally be required to shop at least 6 feet apart from those not in their immediate families and will not be allowed to enter stores if they are exhibiting coronavirus symptoms. It was unclear how many markets, including the city's historic Eastern Market, would be forced to close due to the order. Our grocery workers are on the front line of the response to this pandemic. All of us need to do everything in our power to keep them safe. Or I suppose if you really wanted to terrify people, you could move towards shutting down all purveyors of food and drink, which may be the final step in the panic. A story from the Wall Street Journal, and I'll have more to say about the Wall Street Journal shortly. Haywire immune response eyed in coronavirus deaths treatment. An immune system gone haywire may be doing more damage than the coronavirus itself in patients with the severest forms of COVID-19, doctors and scientists say. A growing theory that could point the way to potential treatments. Much remains unknown about the path the virus takes in the sickest patients, but an increasing number of experts believe a hyperactive immune response rather than the virus is what ultimately kills many COVID-19 patients. The out-of-control immune response eventually causes the patient's lungs to stop delivering oxygen to the rest of the organs, leading to respiratory failure and, in some cases, death, the experts say. The malfunctioning immune system may be driving the rapid decline in lung function experienced by some patients, including younger and relatively healthy ones, after the initial onset of symptoms, doctors say. So, I don't know. Perhaps it is panic that is causing this haywire immune response. Let's see. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's America's leading expert, says U.S. COVID-19 deaths could be as low as 60,000 after warning millions could die. And this is a bait and switch to enable totalitarian takeover. Your human rights have pretty much all been suspended. The government is now run not by elected representatives, but by unelected experts. And after telling us that everyone is going to die, now they're clawing back these predictions. That, oh, yes, we've taken away your civil rights, God knows how long before they come back, and let's pat ourselves on the back. It's, the old joke, the operation was a success, but the patient died. From the Associated Press, as health officials around the world push to get more ventilators to treat coronavirus patients, some doctors are moving away from using the breathing machines when they can. The reason? Some hospitals have reported unusually high death rates for coronavirus patients on ventilators, and some doctors worry that the machines could be harming certain patients. The evolving treatments highlight the fact that doctors are still learning the best way to manage a virus that emerged only months ago. They are relying on anecdotal, real-time data amid a crush of patients and shortages of basic supplies. Mechanical ventilators push oxygen into patients whose lungs are failing. Using the machines involves sedating a patient and sticking a tube into the throat. Deaths in such sick patients are common no matter the reason they need the breathing help. Generally speaking, 40 to 50% of patients with severe respiratory distress die while on ventilators, experts say, but 80% or more of coronavirus patients placed on the machines in New York City have died, state and city officials say. Higher than normal death rates have also been reported elsewhere in the U.S., said Dr. Albert Rizzo, the American Lung Association's chief medical officer. Similar reports have emerged from China and the United Kingdom. One UK report put the figure at 66%. A very small study in Wuhan, the Chinese city where the disease first emerged, said 86% died. The reason is not clear. It may have to do with what kind of shape the patients were in before they were infected, or it could be related to how sick they had become by the time they were put on the machines, some experts say. But some health professionals have wondered whether ventilators might actually make matters worse in certain patients, perhaps by igniting or worsening a harmful immune system reaction. That's speculation. But experts do say ventilators can be damaging to a patient over time as high-pressure oxygen is forced into the tiny air sacs in a patient's lungs. We know that mechanical ventilation is not benign, said Dr. Eddie Fan, an expert on respiratory treatment at Toronto General Hospital. One of the most important findings in the last few decades is that medical ventilation can worsen lung injury, so we have to be careful how we use it. The dangers can be eased by limiting the amount of pressure and the size of breaths delivered by the machine, Fan said. But some doctors say they're trying to keep patients off ventilators as long as possible and turning to other techniques instead. So it appears we have a situation here where you remember going back several weeks now, we need more ventilators. There's a ventilator crisis. Trump is somehow responsible for this. Get us ventilators, more ventilators, and ventilators kill people. I thought it was general knowledge that ventilators were a last gasp, no pun intended, attempt to save patients. But if this story is correct, it would appear that the experts have messed up again. Let's go to the chat. ChogoKin666 says, my cat passed away. I'm crushed. And that is very sad news indeed. CD Calio says, the very air around us is contaminated. Le Comte de Boreas says, don't touch the trees. That one is hilarious. He also says the beer line is around the block, and adds the numbers have never added up unless you start cooking the numbers, which I'm sure they are already doing. Well, the numbers have been cooked with regard to temperature for a long time now, and everyone has got used to, hey, how come this is the hottest season ever, supposedly, say the experts, when it didn't seem to be all that hot where I live. Okay. YT says, mine, I'm assuming that's a cat, died in my arms. It was a crazy making experience, but also one that made me see and understand things I wouldn't have otherwise. Death of those we love is quite something. Anne Run says, he also said we should stop shaking hands permanently, I think. Le Comte de Boreas says, welcome to the mandatory vaccination. VDR salutes Theater Thursday, and we are going to be talking about a most excellent and appropriate film for Holy Week. It's Xavier Beauvois of Gods and Men, and that will be at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. Dawn from Beyond says total U.S. deaths in March 2020 are 15% less than usual, citing Gateway Pundit. Well, of course, since iatrogenic deaths are down because people are staying away from healthcare unless there is an emergency. Chogo King 666 says British people are accosting lone sunbathers and hikers. Why? What is the point other than to exert control? Well, that's obviously the point. I'm sure it must be thrilling to some people to be able to inform strangers that normal quotidian human activity is now against the law. So when is this madness going to end? We know that President Trump wanted to start up America for Easter Sunday, which is 4 days from now, 3 days from now rather, and but then he was bullied out of this by the medical elite and the media. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said he believed it was possible, this is from CNBC, that the U.S. could open back up for business next month following the effective halt of the economy because of the coronavirus. I do, Mnuchin said, after CNBC's Jim Cramer asked about reopening the economy in May. The comments came during an interview on CNBC's Squawk on the Street. The remarks were made shortly after the Federal Reserve announced new moves designed to get another $2.3 trillion of financing for business and municipalities. Mnuchin said, I think as soon as possible as the president feels comfortable with the medical issues. The Treasury Secretary said the administration was doing everything necessary that American companies and American workers can be open for business and that they have the liquidity that they need to operate their business in the interim. Well, to paraphrase a famous statement by Senator Everett Dirksen, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, pretty soon you're talking real money. The U.S. economy remains effectively halted amid government efforts to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Trump is already stepping up efforts to reopen the economy. The president is planning to create a second task force designed to focus on the response to the economic devastation that COVID-19 has wrought, a senior administration official told NBC News. Now, I'll just comment that it is not COVID-19 that is responsible for the economic devastation in America and in the rest of the Western world. It is the panic that is responsible. Experts have cautioned that the reopening process could be a long one, and I suppose the experts have got used to being in charge, and they don't like the idea that they're going to have to go back to their obscure lives in their offices and laboratories. Frieden said that the U.S. will have to vastly expand the number of daily coronavirus tests it is administering before the process can begin. The economic toll from the coronavirus has been without precedent. More than 6.6 million Americans filed jobless claims last week, according to data released on Thursday, bringing the total number of total claims in just the last 3 weeks to more than 16 million. So far, the pandemic has sickened at least 432,554 in the U.S., and at least 14,829 have lost their lives, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. Well, again, if you're going to ascribe every death of a person with coronavirus to a coronavirus, you're going to get high numbers. But 14,829 does not seem especially high in the light of traditional historic numbers for winter and springtime respiratory illnesses. Laura Ingraham says at some point the president is going to have to look at Doctors Fauci and Birx and say, we're opening on May the 1st. Give me your best guidance on protocols, but we cannot deny our people their basic freedoms any longer. Here. Someone comments, if it was up to deep state Fauci, we would be in lockdown for the next year. Yes. House Democrats are actually, Representative Jim Jordan says, House Democrats are actually demanding that illegal immigrants receive benefits in the next coronavirus aid package. Seriously, that can't happen while so many American families are struggling. So let's look at the financials. The Dow was up 286 points today, 1.22%, bringing it up to 23,719. Yes, the American economy has been crushed, but the markets have managed to wriggle away. That again, the number one rule is that Wall Street must always be made whole. The VIX, or the Scaredy Cat Index, was down 1.68. That's 3.9%. What else do we have here? OPEC and allies agree to historic 10 million barrel per day production cut. Progressive groups push Biden to keep Wall Street out of White House. I don't know, perhaps they are pushing Joe Biden's wife, Dr. Jill, because Joe is not in any shape to make any kind of decisions. He can't even speak properly. I mean, for just one sentence. What are the top market movers? Well, the Gap is up 1.24%. United Airlines up 4 points. Newmont Corporation, which is a mining corporation, up 13.4%. And yeah, 4 steps you should actively be taking to prevent your child from identity theft. Oh, are we worried about that now? For our children? Air pollution drops 30% in Northeast U.S. as coronavirus lockdown slows travel. Yes, let's return to a state of nature. That would require, no economy at all, but perhaps Mother Earth will be grateful. EU ministers sealed deal on a €500 billion coronavirus rescue plan. I wonder if the EU is actually going to make it past this year. Ray Dalio predicts a coronavirus depression. This is bigger than what happened in 2008. Well, yes, because in 2008, there wasn't this mad panic. So let's look at Britain. According to the London Daily Star, coronavirus lockdown measures to stay in place after decision made in Cobra meeting. Ooh, that sounds really cool. I mean, wouldn't you want to be part of the Cobra task group? The UK's coronavirus lockdown will be extended indefinitely. It was confirmed today. Bye-bye, Britain. Dominic Raab, who is deputizing for Prime Minister Boris Johnson while he remains in intensive care, told media at Thursday's press briefing that it's too early to consider relaxing the rules that have seen Brits remaining indoors for almost 3 weeks. We are not done yet, he announced. We must keep going. The government will not have enough information for more updates on the lockdown's length until the end of next week. He thanked everyone who has gone the extra mile. That is an unfortunate metaphor. And followed the safety rules so far and says the data indicates it's working so far. Pat yourself on the back there, Dominic Raab. Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance said social distancing is breaking coronavirus transmission, and we're beginning to see a flattening off in the number of new cases. Now, presumably, Sir Patrick knows about viruses and knows that viruses always go first for the low-hanging fruit. And after the weakest have been culled, then the virus comes up against more and more resistance. I mean, he understands this, right? Let's see. The government said it would review the lockdown policy after 3 weeks and did so at today's emergency Cobra meeting at 10 Downing Street. Raab stressed that the lockdown cannot be relaxed until the UK has the coronavirus outbreak firmly under control. And there's a picture of 3 British people sunbathing, and there is a police car next to them telling them to clear off. Your rights as Englishmen have been suspended for the duration. We mustn't give the coronavirus a second chance to kill more people and further hurt our country. What about a 3rd, 4th, and 5th chance? I mean, if you're going to look at it that way, then the lockdown will have to be indefinite. And what about all those other viruses yet to be born? Can we be too safe? And the answer so far from the British government has been no, we can't. Raab apologized that no one will be able to enjoy the holiday outside, but said we all need to keep complying with public health guidance. No one will be able to enjoy the holiday outside. Well, apparently the jails are being emptied of criminals, and so now they're going to be filled with people sunbathing without a license. Oi, mate, you got a license for that sunbathing? Raab told the public not to get their hopes up about the lockdown ending anytime soon. Our number one and overriding focus right now is on conveying the key message, which is that everyone needs to keep adhering to this guidance. There is a long Easter bank holiday weekend coming up, warm weather, and we understand people are making big sacrifices to follow this guidance. It is helping, it is contributing to our ability to tackle the coronavirus. The worst thing now would be to take our foot off the pedal. Another unfortunate metaphor. To ease up on that and risk losing the gains that have been made. It is absolutely critical that people keep up that discipline, and the vast majority will. We hope everyone will follow that example. Dominic Raab and Boris Johnson have made themselves Britain's Thelma and Louise. They're determined to drive that T-bird over the cliff. So, how badly has the coronavirus impacted the U.S. economy? According to the Washington Post, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said Thursday the U.S. economy is in an emergency and is deteriorating with alarming speed. His remarks came shortly after the central bank unveiled over $2 trillion in new loans to keep the economy afloat as much of the nation goes into lockdown to fight the spread of the deadly coronavirus. People have been asked to put their lives and livelihoods on hold at significant economic and personal cost, Powell said in a Brookings Institution webcast. We are moving with alarming speed from 50-year lows in unemployment to what will likely be very high, although temporary, levels. Does he know that they're temporary? This is an experiment unprecedented in human history. Powell called for a national discussion about what it will take to reopen the economy, but he urged caution about moving too quickly and triggering another spike in coronavirus cases and deaths. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin has said it's possible businesses can reopen in May. Powell said sometime after July is more likely. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see whether there's any American economy left after that. The Fed's latest actions go even further than what the central bank did during the Great Recession. The Fed is directly buying debt from large corporations and states, a level of support it hasn't tried before. There's widespread worry that some companies and households will go bankrupt during the pandemic because they will not be able to borrow money in time. But the Fed has taken large and unprecedented steps to keep as much credit flowing as possible. Well, I mean, this is a kind of, how would you say, quasi-nationalization of the American economy. Powell and many top economic leaders are trying to answer two key questions. How deep and how long will the economic downturn be? As long as the lockdown is in place, you morons. Among Fed leaders, the growing consensus is that the economic pain will be substantial and the recovery will be slow. There's widespread agreement people must feel safe to go out again, and the worst possible outcome would be opening the economy too early, triggering another spike in coronavirus cases and deaths. You see what's happened here? That I talked about a quasi-nationalization. No, it is a nationalization. The economy apparently now belongs to experts like Powell and doctors Fauci and Birx. We need to have a plan nationally for reopening the economy. We want it to happen as quickly as possible, Powell said. We all want to avoid a false start where we partially reopen and that results in a spike in coronavirus cases. Again, this suggests that Powell is determined that the lockdown lasts for a very long time, after July, until after July, perhaps. Well, I don't know. Is that safe enough? Is that a possible risk? The U.S. economy may contract by more than 30% in April through June, some economists predict. Powell said the economy would be very weak. He is hopeful businesses around the nation can reopen, reviving the economy safely in the second half of the year, but he didn't want to give a specific month. This is a public health issue, Eric Rosengren, president of the Boston Fed, said in an interview. There are times if you make bad decisions, they are very costly. We need to try to minimize that. This is very ironic. There are times if you make bad decisions, they are very costly. Well, we're living through the result of a very bad decision. Rosengren said it's clear the public health responses in the United States have not gone as well as they have in some other countries, and that is adding to the economic pain as businesses have to be closed for a longer period of time. Do you see this jealousy of Britain? That the experts in charge of our lives are, they're looking to Britain for guidance. Where can't sunbathe anymore? Exercise? Well, is it essential exercise? Is this trip necessary? Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin said the economy can't bounce back until people feel comfortable to go out again to restaurants, baseball games, or concerts. He sees parallels to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States and how unsafe people felt to fly until the government enacted major security overhauls. Really? They're not doing at the airports what Israel does, which is to look for, what would be obvious terrorists. They've simply decided that going to an airport must be a humiliating experience. A humiliating and distressing experience. Made anyone safer? Well, they've done something, and I suppose that's the most important thing. We're going to have to think hard about what are the things that will have to make us feel safe to shop again or eat out again, said Barkin. After 9/11, President George W. Bush encouraged people to go out and spend as a form of patriotism, and the nation responded. But that is unlikely to work again, given that the health issues touch so much of the economy. Barkin said it will take some sort of national protocol, such as requiring people to wear masks in public and sit a certain distance apart at restaurants and on airplanes to get consumer confidence high enough to spend again. Yeah, at the same time, various experts are disagreeing with each other violently almost about whether it is useful for normies to wear masks. There is no consensus on this, but perhaps the government will just force everyone to wear masks in public. Anyway, as Fed leaders prepare for difficult months ahead for the economy, Wall Street has become more optimistic, partly due to the central bank's massive actions. U.S. stocks were down about 30% in March as coronavirus cases mounted and Congress stalled on passing a $2 trillion relief package. In recent days, stocks have rallied. U.S. stocks are now down about 20% from the February highs. The Fed will soon begin purchasing up to $750 billion in corporate loans from big businesses that had at least an investment grade rating. March 22nd, a high bar that some struggling companies won't be able to meet. But big retail chains such as Macy's, Gap, or JCPenney are likely to qualify since their debt slide below investment grade after that date. So the experts love being in control. We just see this over and over again. And of course, you just can't be too safe. Let's go to the chat. Lecomte Borea says, Africa doesn't have clean drinking water. Washing their hands and self-isolation is not a priority, yet no corpses piling up in Africa. Chogankin 66 says, will this winter of discontent be made glorious summer by the son of York? Not bored says, masks are killing me. They're making my paranoia ratchet to 11. Well, yes. And it's not just the people wearing the masks. It is seeing people on the streets wearing masks. And what is this, some sort of doomsday situation that we're in? Cousin Lee says, can we deport Bill Gates to China? Keep atrophying and maintain that sickly pallor. Well, since I have my hotel room light here, my pallor is much less sickly than it was. Moonman says, I like Kevin's hotel room digs, as do I, but clearly this is a temporary solution. I guess there's a tendency, when you're living in a hotel to forget how long you've been there. And I had to keep reminding myself that this is, I arrived on the 7th and it's now the 9th. Okay, so I guess I have 5 days left. Glad Kevin is back. I was getting ADD from Luke. David Wright says, can't help thinking a side benefit for the elites is a new way to destroy the deplorables. That is certainly true. I mean, if you look at flyover country in America has been just battered in recent decades as manufacturing was outsourced to China and elsewhere. And will flyover America survive? Don from Beyond says, for the nitty-gritty truth, watch Dr. John Bergman, also Dr. Shiva, and adds, Fauci is a total villain. Lecomte Brea says, they keep talking about the unemployment rate, yet they forced. A cataclysm-generated economic recession is not a recession if the cataclysm is fake. Well, that's a funny thing about a cataclysm. Whether it was justified or not, it is certainly real, as we see in the economic numbers. Okay, Eternal Fisherman says one of the first major terrorist attacks in Israel was performed by Japanese, not very obvious suspects. Lod Airport, 1972, Japanese Red Army. Dionysius recommends The Decadent Society. Is that Ross Douthat? I'll have to get around to looking into that. Dear Yeoman says maybe Kevin can lighten the mood with discourse on the musical stylings of Amanda Palmer. Oh, you mean Amanda fucking Palmer, as she styles herself? You know, in any kind of just society, that woman would be starving to death in a ditch. And she was a failed rock musician who decided that she would classify herself as an artist, a performance artist. And when you're a performance artist, you don't have to be popular. If you're in the rock biz and you're not popular, you don't make any money. But performance art is just assumed to be horrible, and it gets supported because it is horrible. And Amanda Palmer, of course, she wrote a very touching lament for one of the Boston bombers. She got Neil Gaiman to marry her. Well, how about that? Let's see. Where are we going to go next? 16.8 Americans out of work. Easter celebrations move online. This is from the Associated Press. Yes, Easter has been canceled for what? The first time in almost 2,000 years. Religious leaders around the globe Thursday urged people to celebrate Good Friday and Easter from the safety of their homes. Now, you wouldn't want the community of other Christians. That would be unsafe. In other developments, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was moved out of intensive care at the London hospital where he's being treated for the virus. The 55-year-old leader had taken a turn for the worse earlier in the week as his country descended into its biggest crisis since World War II. Governments warned that the hard-won gains against the scourge must not be jeopardized by relaxing social distancing over the weekend. Across Europe, where Easter is one of the busiest travel times of the year, authorities set up roadblocks and otherwise discouraged family gatherings. Do people even need families anymore? I mean, what with the internet? Surely all family meetings can be made virtual. A spike in deaths in Britain and New York and surges of reported new infections in Japan and in India's congested cities made it clear the battle is far from over. New York State reported a record-breaking number of dead for the third straight day, 799. More than 7,000 people have died in the state, accounting for almost half the U.S. death toll of more than 16,000 people. New York is, what, about 2% of the population of the United States? And half of the death toll. Well, that is curious. New York City, of course, has exceedingly high population density and a great many of people suffering from pre-existing conditions. That is so shocking and painful and breathtaking, I don't even have the words for it, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said. But he added there are hopeful signs, including slowdowns in the number of people being hospitalized, admitted to intensive care, and placed on ventilators. He said the onslaught of patients has not been as big as feared, and hospitals are standing up to the strain so far. About 18,000 people were hospitalized, well short of the 90,000 hospital beds statewide, many of which were hurriedly lined up at a convention center and a Navy ship docked in the city. So we were told repeatedly that the health system in New York State was going to be completely overrun, and that is nowhere near the case. Worldwide, the number of dead measured 95,000 and confirmed infections reached about 1.5 million, according to Johns Hopkins University, though the true numbers are believed much higher. Of course, they must be much higher, because 1.5 million in a world population of 7 billion, that doesn't sound like very many people, does it? The true numbers are believed much higher, in part because of different rules for counting the dead. Yes, some places are still sane enough not to ascribe all deaths of people with coronavirus to coronavirus and cover-ups by some governments. Still more job cuts are expected. The U.S. unemployment rate in April could hit 15%, not a number not seen since the end of the Great Depression. Well, my understanding that unemployment rate in the United States during the Great Depression reached a high of 25%. But come on, folks, we can beat that. Keep the panic going. Gotta break those records. The head of the International Monetary Fund warned that the global economy is headed for the worst recession since the Depression. The United Nations Labor Organization said the equivalent of 195 million full-time jobs could be lost in the second quarter, while the aid organization Oxfam International estimated 500 million people worldwide could be pushed into poverty. So let's compare those numbers. Let's see, 1.5 million infections, according to Johns Hopkins. Okay. And how many people have lost their jobs? Well, apparently the UN says 195 million full-time jobs could be lost in the second quarter alone, while the aid organization Oxfam said 500 million people worldwide could be pushed into poverty. Yes, the operation was a success, but the patient died. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top U.S. infectious disease experts, shot down hopes that warmer spring weather would bring an end to the crisis. One should not assume that we are going to be rescued by a change in the weather, he said. You must assume that the virus will continue to do its thing. I always thought that America was founded because its founders did not want to live under a king. But apparently America has a king now, and his name is Dr. Anthony Fauci. Amid widespread restrictions on public gatherings, major religious denominations are holding virtual services where members can watch on TV, online, or on their phones. Others are arranging prayer at drive-in theaters where people can stay in their cars. The virus doesn't take a day off for Good Friday or Easter Sunday, said Archbishop John Wester of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'm reminded of a line from Of Gods and Men, which we'll be talking about in about 45 minutes. The Good Shepherd does not abandon his flock to the wolves. Pope Francis will celebrate Easter Mass in a nearly empty St. Peter's Basilica instead of the huge square outside. In England, the Archbishop of Canterbury will deliver his Easter sermon by video. The British government is running ads urging people to stay home, save lives over the weekend. German Chancellor Angela Merkel emphasized that even short trips inside Germany to the seaside or the mountains of relatives can't happen over Easter. Well, there's the German spirit for you. Greece also tightened restrictions ahead of next week's Orthodox Easter, including roadblocks, doubling fines for lockdown violations, and banning travel between islands. Meanwhile, there are encouraging signs in France, where the National Health Agency saw indications that the crisis is stabilizing, though more than 12,000 lives have been lost. New infections, hospitalizations, and deaths have been leveling off in hard-hit Italy and Spain, which together have around 33,000 deaths, but the daily tolls are still shocking. Well, they're leveling off because of the rule of the low-hanging fruit. So, a story from the Wall Street Journal. Farmers dump milk, break eggs as coronavirus restaurant closings destroy demand. It was still dark outside at 4 o'clock in a recent morning when a tanker truck poured 6,000 gallons of milk into a manure pit on Nancy Mueller's Wisconsin dairy farm. The milk, collected from Mueller Dairy Farm's 1,000 cows, should have been hauled to dairy processors across the state for bottling or to be turned into cheese. But the coronavirus pandemic is disrupting all that, closing restaurants and schools that buy the nation's dairy products and forcing hard choices for farmers like Mrs. Mueller. It was heart-wrenching, she said. It is not the coronavirus pandemic that is responsible for good things being destroyed. It is the panic. Farmers and food companies across the country are throttling back production as the virus creates chaos in the agricultural supply chain, erasing sales to restaurants, hotels, and cafeterias, despite grocery stores rushing to restock shelves. American producers stuck with vast quantities of food they cannot sell are dumping milk, throwing out chicken hatching eggs, and rendering pork bellies into lard instead of bacon. In part, this is because they can't easily shift products bound for restaurant into the appropriate sizes, packages, and labels necessary for sales at supermarkets. Few in the agricultural industry expect grocery store demand to offset the restaurant market's steep decline. Farms are plowing under hundreds of acres of vegetables in prime U.S. growing regions like Arizona and Florida. Chicken companies are shrinking their flocks to curb supplies that could weigh on prices for months to come. Now, there's an oft-quoted rule that, 50% of restaurants go out of business in their first year. How many restaurants are going to die permanently because of this? Yes, I promised I would have something to say about Donald Trump and the Wall Street Journal. Trump fired back at this is from Mediaite, Trump fired back at the Wall Street Journal editorial board after they declared that his daily coronavirus press conferences had become boring and not productive. In response, Trump deemed Rupert Murdoch's paper fake news and touted the high ratings of the televised pressers. The Wall Street Journal always forgets to mention that the ratings for the White House press briefings are through the roof and is only way for me to escape the fake news and get my views across, Trump tweeted Thursday afternoon. Wall Street Journal is fake news, the president added. This shows the hypocrisy of journalists because they are frequently complaining that leaders are not giving enough time, are not giving enough time to the press. Oh, we have questions, but we're not being able to ask our questions. And so Trump comes out every day and asks all of these questions, many of which are stupid, gotcha questions. And now the media is complaining about this. Apparently, the media has just too much access to the president, and the people of America apparently have too much access to the president. On Wednesday, the Wall Street Journal editorial board ripped the coronavirus press conferences, which frequently allowed Trump to demand praise for his efforts, in a column which argued the press conferences frequently dissolve into a useless squabble with the press pool in the room. The piece, titled Trump's Wasted Briefings, argued that Trump will be judged by the results of the coronavirus response, not how well he says he did. Well, that's obvious, is it not? Mr. Trump seems to have concluded that the briefings could be a showcase for him, the editorial board wrote. Perhaps they substitute in his mind for the campaign rallies he can no longer hold because of the risks. Perhaps he resented the media adulation that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been receiving for his daily show. Whatever the reason, the briefings are now all about the president. Well, it is in the nature of disasters, man-made or otherwise, that the president of the United States becomes the focus of attention. It certainly was the case with Franklin Delano Roosevelt after Pearl Harbor. It certainly was the case with Harry Truman during the Korean War. This did not end well for him. It effectively knocked him out of office. Lyndon Johnson became the focus of attention during the Vietnam War. Again, that forced him out of office. Even Jimmy Carter, history's greatest monster, became the focus of attention with his Rose Garden strategy after the hostage taking in Iran. And similarly, George W. Bush, wasn't he the figure that rallied the nation after 9/11? So the same thing is happening with Trump, as has happened to many presidents in the past. The media is infuriated by this simply because they hate Donald Trump. According to Breitbart, Elizabeth Warren is mobilizing for universal vote by mail. It's easy. Yes, we bring the fraud to you. Senator Elizabeth Warren, this is from Breitbart, is rallying progressive troops to champion universal vote by mail for the upcoming election, touting it as an easy solution, particularly during a pandemic. Citing the controversy over Wisconsin proceeding with this in-person primary election on Tuesday, Warren said it was essential for states to implement a series of drastic changes to voting methods, including universal vote by mail, a concept that has, throughout history, been met with heavy scrutiny due to the increased potential of voter fraud. A voter gets a ballot with a postage-paid return envelope. They vote, they sign it, and they send it back. It's easy to vote by mail, Warren said in a video by Tuesday evening. And in addition, there should be online registration, extended registration deadlines, and expand early voting to make sure that voting is accessible to all people. And the federal government should be sending money to the states to make this happen. Well, it is the states that determine their own voting procedures. It is not the federal government. So we're going to have voting by mail, and what you can vote weeks or months before the election. You don't have to actually see how the election campaign goes. You don't have to wait for the October surprise. I don't know. How about people could vote, for president right now? Because Trump's running for the Republicans, and Joe Biden, assuming that he's not pillowed, will represent the Democrats. Said it before, say it again. If you want free and fair elections, you have people coming to the voting booths on election day, with exceptions for military and diplomatic personnel, and marking paper ballots, which are then kept in case of recount. If this vote by mail system is introduced, there will never be another free and fair election in the United States again. We know what happens with this. We've seen it in Britain, where the votes in certain neighborhoods are collected by the local headman, and they're filled out and then delivered. We had vote harvesting in the 2018 American midterms, where, on election night, hey, it looks like the Republicans didn't do too badly. And then the votes kept coming in, and they kept coming in, and they kept coming in, and they were overwhelmingly Democrat votes. And it turns out the Republicans in the House took a pounding. The Massachusetts senator believes the federal government should provide $4 billion, perhaps in the next relief measure, to ensure that states have the resources they need to successfully administer elections, but hinted that the money should be used to implement the reforms she and other Democrats are calling for specifically. According to Warren, lawmakers must ensure that the money is used appropriately by conditioning funding on adopting specific measures that will protect voters and reduce barriers to voting, like American citizenship, say. There's a barrier to voting. Is that going to be swept away? So in skepticism news from Fox, meet the former New York Times reporter who is challenging the coronavirus narrative. As daily life is upended by the coronavirus crisis, with mass business closures plunging the economy into freefall, one former New York Times reporter is sounding the alarm about what he believes are flawed models dictating the aggressive strategy. Alex Berenson has been analyzing the data on the crisis on a daily basis for weeks, and has come to the conclusion that the strategy of shutting down entire sectors of the economy is based on modeling that doesn't line up with the realities of the virus. The response we have taken has caused enormous societal devastation. I don't think that's too strong a word, Berenson said. He is a former reporter who worked for the Times from 1999 to 2010, primarily covering the pharmaceutical industry. He recently came to prominence again with a book, Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence, which challenged prevailing narratives on marijuana. In the face of a broadening consensus on both the left and the libertarian right that sees marijuana as mostly healthy and even a positive in some circumstances, Berenson argued that the evidence instead shows a link between the drug and serious mental illness and an epidemic of violence. As Peter Hitchens is fond of pointing out, that it seems that all of these terrorist killers in Britain and other mass killers were dopeheads and or on SSRIs. Berenson has now turned to challenging the narratives on the response to the coronavirus. What he is promoting isn't coronavirus denialism, oh dear, or conspiracy theories about plots to curb liberties. Instead, what Berenson is claiming is simple. The models guiding the response were wrong, and that is becoming clearer by the day. In February, I was worried about the virus. By mid-March, I was more scared about the economy. But now I'm starting to get genuinely nervous, he tweeted this week. This isn't complicated. The models don't work. The hospitals are empty. Why are we still talking about indefinite lockdowns? Hospitals, of course, are not empty in places like hard-hit New York City, and tales are widespread of overburdened doctors in and emergency rooms, especially if you're using footage from Italy. Berenson acknowledged as much of the interview on Thursday. Okay, so you got 90,000 hospital beds in New York State, 18,000 of them are occupied. That is not empty, but is obviously well below capacity. Concerns that this virus is significantly more contagious and deadly than any ordinary flu strain are what's driving the current government approach in America and around the world. Perhaps due in part to more testing, America reports the highest number of cases in the world right now, with more than 430,000 cases and nearly 15,000 deaths. Symptoms vary widely, with some patients reporting only minor discomfort, yet others dealing with crushing physical pain and struggling to breathe, forced to go on ventilators. Berenson is taking a broader look. He initially challenged the model put forward by the Imperial College in London, when one of the authors of the models appeared to significantly walk back projections that the UK would see 500,000 people killed by the disease to closer to 20,000. That is one whopper of an error, wouldn't you agree? Although the author later said that the 500,000 prediction was without social distancing measures, and 20,000 was with them in place. That model is being used to advise the UK government on its strategy for the virus. Berenson said, "That was March 22nd to 23rd, and ever since then, I've been paying incredibly close attention to the modeling and trying to figure out whether it lines up with what we're seeing in reality, and the answer is it hasn't lined up at all." Recently, he's been focusing on discrepancies within the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation model. That model has come under renewed scrutiny as it has revised its metrics several times. It once predicted more than 90,000 deaths by August, but recently issued a new estimate that has the figure closer to 60,000. Government officials say it's a model that's moving with what the country is doing. "We believe that our healthcare delivery system in the United States is quite extraordinary," Dr. Deborah Birx said at a White House press briefing on Wednesday. "I know many of you are watching the Act Now model and the IHME model, and they have consistently decreased the mortality from over 90,000 or 86,000 down to 81 and now down to 61,000. That is modeled on what America is doing. That's what's happening." Dr. Anthony Fauci, the king of America, said the indicators are that social distancing efforts are working, because remember, what you do with data will always outstrip a model. You redo your models depending upon your data, and our data is telling us that mitigation is working. But Berenson argues that those models have social distancing and other measures baked into them. As for further proof, he says that outside of places like New York, there has not been a national health crisis that was predicted, nor are there signs that the level of lockdown in various states has made a difference. Aside from New York, nationally, there's been no health system crisis. In fact, to be truly correct, there has been a health system crisis, but the crisis is that the hospitals are empty. That is true in Florida, where the lockdown was late. This is true in Southern California, where the lockdown was early. It's true in Oklahoma, where there is no statewide lockdown. There doesn't, despite the efforts of Michelle Rempel Garner, there doesn't seem to be any correlation between the lockdown and whether or not the epidemic has spread wide and fast. He has also argued in lengthy Twitter threads that the drop in cases seen in various states has come before lockdowns would have had an impact, since it takes a few weeks for social distancing measures to take effect due to the window between infection and symptoms. Berenson blames the models for a response that has effectively shut down large sectors of the economy and is causing significant financial harm to Americans. On Thursday, it was announced that the number of Americans seeking unemployment benefits swelled to 6.6 million last week, surging for the third consecutive week. Congress has sought to alleviate the pain by boosting those jobless benefits. Berenson's is a view that has seen some sympathy from President Trump, who has spoken about the cure being worse than the problem, and has indicated that he is keen to end the strict measures as soon as possible, saying Wednesday he wants to reopen the economy with a big bang. Berenson says the correct response in the initial days of the crisis would not have been to do nothing, but instead to adopt a more measured and targeted approach. There was incredible pressure to do something, so these lockdowns all cascaded. Every governor tried to outdo the next. No one stopped and said, okay, what about Japan? They don't seem to have a terrible epidemic. They wear masks. Maybe we should wear masks, he said. adding that other measures such as protecting individuals particularly at risk and even things such as banning large gatherings such as concerts and sporting events could have been appropriate. But now he fears it may be too late for officials to say they have overreacted. Do you ever hear official admitting that he overreacted, that he ever made a mistake? Pretty rare. Berenson continued, now we're in a bad spot because there's clearly a dangerous political dynamic right now. The economy is in free fall. A lot of people are hurting. If we acknowledge what is clearly happening, the people who made these decisions, I think there's going to be a lot of anger at them. So they don't want to acknowledge it. So they say, oh, it's the lockdown that saved us, he says. Berenson is not a known partisan. His Twitter feed and other works contain few references to specific politicians, and there's no indication that he's in this to bash or defend Trump or either political party. But he noted that, like with his conclusions on marijuana, there has been a distinct lack of interest from the left. Yes, and when has the left ever campaigned against Leviathan? I went to Yale and I worked for the New York Times. The people on the left hold themselves out as being science-driven, as being smarter. They think they're smarter, but they won't look at facts that won't meet their narratives. This is frustrating for me, but everyone needs to hear this counter-argument. Whether or not it's right, you need to hear it because the damage we are doing to ourselves right now is so enormous. You know, this is Holy Week. Today is Holy Thursday. And if you are a praying man or woman, I would urge you all to pray that President Trump lifts the lockdown at the beginning of May. If he does so, I think it'd be very difficult for leaders of other countries around the world not to follow suit. Oh, some coronavirus good news from Breitbart. Foreign nationals held in Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody are self-deporting from the United States to avoid potential infection with the Chinese coronavirus. While federal judges are helping release convicted illegal alien and legal immigrant criminals from ICE detention amid claims that they could potentially contract the coronavirus, some ICE detainees are self-deporting back to their native countries. Recent cases detailed by USA Today found 2 ICE detainees getting ready to leave the U.S. to avoid a potential coronavirus, and one of them is Ricky Wilson, 31, a detainee at Mesa Verde. He told a judge in the immigration court last week he was dropping his case to remain in the U.S. because he would rather be deported to his native United Kingdom than wait for the virus to start circulating through the detention center. Martin Alvarez Garcia, 28, made a similar decision last week. He's had a cough and sore throat for more than 2 weeks, he said, but doctors at the facility have denied his request for a COVID-19 test because he doesn't have a fever. So last week, he waived his right to appeal his deportation order. In the case of 6 illegal aliens and legal immigrants who were released in California by a federal judge, a handful of them have repeatedly petitioned immigration courts to drop their deportation orders and have been repeatedly denied. This week, a Massachusetts federal judge announced he would likely be ordering the release of multiple ICE detainees from custody every day. The ICE detainees must be either civil immigration violators or have only a non-violent criminal record to be eligible for release. And it's not as if, non-violent crime ever causes great damage to people. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus has asked for all 40,000 ICE detainees, including those with violent crime convictions, to be released from federal custody to avoid possible infection of the coronavirus. Well, I suppose that's one way to reduce the pressure on the police and on the legal system, is to just stop catching, trying, and imprisoning criminals. The Comte Borea says you will see no relief from politics. They will keep you locked up until Fauci will sell the vaccine. Ricky Bullock says Dana White. Ooh, what happened there? Now we're getting a lot of comments here, and I lost that one. I thought Dana was setting up an island for UFC, Chad Chadson. Josh Randall makes a joke. When coronavirus mutates to Budweiser virus, we're doomed. Well, Budweiser was owned by a company in the Midwest called Anheuser-Busch. It was a great American institution. It is now owned by Belgians and run by a Brazilian. It is no longer an American company, and it doesn't. Budweiser is no longer the patriotic brew. A Half Galician says Berenson needs to chill out with some ganja. Well, that's funny because, of course, marijuana famously induces a paranoia. The number of people that have told me personally, or that I have read their confessions, that they stopped using it because of the fear. They could no longer stand the fear. Okay. Ultra Testosterone says hospitals are empty in most of the USA. Okay, let's go to the bottom here. How many chicks has KMG picked up in that suit? It has been a long time since I've been in the business of picking up chicks, so I don't know what the answer was. Probably close to 0. Ashy Bravo says, are liquor stores and weed dispensaries still considered essential services? Well, the liquor stores certainly are where I live in British Columbia. I can't speak for the weed dispensaries, although they appear to be a very significant part of Victoria's economy. You know, Vancouver, where I lived most of my life, is a city whose economy seems to be based on designer coffee, ethnic food, and weed dispensaries. Okay. Jonathan Cheng tweets, some U.S. companies are still plowing fresh investment dollars into China. Walmart said Wednesday it would invest $425 million in Wuhan over 5 years, while Starbucks said earlier it is investing $125 million to build a roasting plant. So Walmart, which is what, America's retailer, is they're giving China, Wuhan specifically, a prize. Yes, so Wuhan affects the world, and it gets paid for doing so. Matt Stoller, whose book Goliath will be coming up on the book club soon, says the U.S. government needs to get control of American multinationals enough. So we see that it took about, what, 20 years, more than 20 years, but people are coming around to the message that Pat Buchanan has been pushing since the 1990s. In showbiz news, Roger Friedman reports, in strange, overproduced new video, Madonna mumbles that she's lost 3 friends and I'm over it. Madonna is losing her mind. In a very strange, overproduced new video, she mumbles she's lost 3 friends, unclear if to coronavirus, and that she's over it. She says, I'm over it. She's entirely disconnected from reality. Every single music star who isn't ailing has done something positive so far. They've given impromptu online concerts, made PSAs, participated in fundraisers, started fundraisers. All of her so-called enemies, Lady Gaga, Elton John, and so on, are busy digging in for the cause. Madonna, however, is over it. I think we're over it too. 1, 2, cha, cha, cha. I talked, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, when Madonna made this very strange video. She was in a milk bath, and she was saying that the coronavirus has no favorites, you know, doesn't care if you're young or you're old. Well, it very much cares whether you are young or you're old. Oh, yes, a bit of personal news. It's becoming an internet meme to choose your quarantine house. I guess this started, I talked about famous writers, well, some of whom were famous. And there's been many other categories, but now we have one for YouTube yackers. And house number 1, Duvid, Daniel Natal or Natali, Right Ruminations, Gandalf, Ultra High Tea. In house number 2, Kevin Michael Grace, Matt Vey, Glib Medley, Norvin Hobbs, and Jim Goad. In house number 3, Ricardo Williams, Melchizedek, Kyle Roland, Babs, and Paul Tuck. In house number 4, Luke Ford, Vivian Veritas, Problematic Bob, Judas Starchai, and COE. In house number 5, Otto Pohl, Eche Lux, Claire Ka, Monsieur, and Rodney. And in house number 6, Colin Liddell, Richard Spencer, Davis Arini, Pill Eater, and Dennis Dale. And my comment yesterday was, I don't know what Dennis Dale ever did to deserve that kind of treatment. House number 2 has me in it, and Matt Bay commented, well, the first thing we do is to tie up and gag Jim Goad and shove him in a closet so the rest of us can smoke gitans and watch KMG's Blu-rays, which certainly sounds pleasant enough. The saintly Archbishop Vigano asks bishops, priests, and to pray exorcism against Satan on Holy Saturday. This is a story from LifeSite News, which begins on October 13th, 1884. Leo XIII had a terrible vision of the assault of the powers of hell against Holy Mother Church and ordered the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel to be said at the end of Mass. He also composed an act of exorcism and ordered it to be inserted into the Roman ritual and explicitly mentioned what he had seen. Quote, "The Church, the spouse of the Immaculate Lamb, has been filled with bitterness and inebriated with poison by her crafty enemies, who have laid impious hands on her most sacred possessions. In the place where the see of Holy Peter and the chair of truth has been set up as the light of the world, they have raised the throne of their abominable impiety, with the iniquitous design that when the pastor has been struck, the sheep may be scattered," unquote. Vigano continues, in these modern times of terrible tribulation, when the pandemic has deprived Catholics of Holy Mass and the sacraments, the evil one has gone into a frenzy and multiplied his attacks to tempt souls into sin. These blessed days of Holy Week, which used to be the ideal time to go to confession, to prepare ourselves for our Easter communion, now sees us locked inside our houses, but they cannot stop us praying to our Lord. Since it is a day of silence while we await his glorious resurrection, this Holy Saturday ought to be an ideal opportunity for sacred ministers. There is no need to go out or to breach any of the laws currently in force. Holy Saturday is the day when we remember our Lord Jesus Christ as he descended into hell to free the souls of the fathers from Satan's chains. In the great silence after our Lord's passion and death, Our Lady kept watch and believed, waiting in hope for the resurrection of her dearly beloved Son. It was a time when the world seemed to have won, but when everything was being prepared for the glory of Easter. I should like to ask all my brother bishops and priests to join me as I recite this exorcism, knowing the power of the sacramental, especially when it is recited together with all other priests, to help the Church in her fight against Satan. I should also like to recommend that all of you wear a stole, the sign of your priestly power, and holy water. The great Mother of God, Mary Most Holy, terrible as an army set in array, and St. Michael the Archangel, patron of the Holy Church and Prince of the Heavenly Host, will help us all. So, turning to Canada, let's look at the most recent numbers. There are 20,748 confirmed cases and 509 deaths. Again, the population of Canada is 38 million people. Highest number of deaths is 216 in Quebec. There's a strange anomaly here because the numbers in Quebec are almost twice as high as they are in Ontario. But Quebec has 216 deaths and Ontario has 200. The number of deaths in my province, British Columbia, has reached 50. And British Columbia has 5.1 million people. 2 died from 2 deaths attributed to COVID-19 yesterday, and 34 more people have been infected. Again, these do not seem like panic-inducing numbers. One more case on Vancouver Island, where I live. That brings it up to 82 on Vancouver Island, and there have been 2 deaths. The Chief Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, says the vast majority of the people who have died are seniors and residents of long-term care, as one would expect. Dr. Henry and Premier Dix credited the physical distancing efforts of British Columbians with keeping the rate of new infections trending downward. They reminded the public to continue maintaining distance from one another and to prevent the further spread of the virus, especially over the Easter long weekend. Yes, Easter must be eradicated. That's another big lesson. all these people getting together, all these Christians getting together. It's just got to stop. Dr. Henry concluded, now is not the time for travel unless it's absolutely necessary and you need to take care of your family. You know, going back to what Berenson, the reporter, had to say, at the top of the show, I talked about these spine-chilling stories from London that you cough in a supermarket and apparently it just lingers in the air. Everyone is exposed to the virus. If you're a jogger, I don't know, your breath is infecting people. These stories are true. Everyone has been exposed, and everyone has been exposed for a long time. I mean, there's no getting away from it. Let's see, roundup of news from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. This is the new normal. Oh, God, here we go again. Until a vaccine is developed, says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Our chief medical officer in Canada, Dr. Theresa Tam, who is a native of China, says we cannot prevent every death, but we must prevent every death that we can. This is the same woman who at the beginning of this pandemic said that the real problem was stigmatization. Racism was the real problem. Federal officials urged people to stick with public health measures aimed at slowing the spread of COVID-19 as they offered their first look at national projections into how the outbreak could unfold on Thursday, the same day that recorded case numbers in Canada topped 20,000. Health officials noted that regions are having different experiences with COVID-19, which has now been reported in every province and territory, except Nunavut. And I will point out, yes, again, that Nunavut is an enormous territory of Canada, frozen wasteland entirely above the Arctic Circle. And it's very, very isolated. And there are few people living there. When exactly the public health measures would be lifted wasn't immediately clear, although Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, or Princess Rockstar, as I like to call him, reiterated at his daily briefing Thursday that efforts to keep case numbers down will take months of continued determined effort. Well, if that's the case, bye-bye, Canada. The initial peak, the top of the curve, may be in late spring, with the end of the first wave in the summer. The Prime Minister, citing Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, said there would likely be smaller outbreaks for several months after that. He said this is the new normal until a vaccine is developed. Dr. Howard Nju, speaking at a news conference after the Prime Minister's address, said health officials can't put a precise time on an expected peak. Canada is only at the beginning of its epidemic. He has no way of knowing that. None whatsoever. And officials need to see how things unfold in every region. The peak won't be clear until we're on the other side of it, Nju said. And how will they know when they're on the other side of it? It could be second outbreak, third, maybe more. We just have to watch it week by week how we're doing as a country. Earlier Thursday, Tam and other officials offered some detail on what might happen, though Tam noted that models don't predict what will happen. Then why are we down on our knees, making obeisance to the models if they can't predict what is going to happen? A forecast for the next weeks suggested Canada could see a cumulative total between 22,580 and 31,850 cases by April 16th, with the death toll reaching between 500 and 700. With strong control measures, the Federal Public Health Agency projects that 11,000 to 22,000 Canadians could die of COVID-19 in the coming months. The total number of positive diagnoses with strong controls ranges from 934,000 to 1.9 million. So it could be this, or it could be more than double. That doesn't strike me as being a particularly useful model. With poor containment measures, the death toll could be much, much higher. So in other words, the economy must be destroyed, society must be destroyed, Canada must be destroyed, or else the evil virus will get us all. The Chief Public Health Officer, the models are highly sensitive, and changes in behavior, including physical distancing, hand washing, and other measures are critical to stamping out the virus. Tam said it's critical to maintain resolve and try to drive case numbers and keep hospitalization and ICU admissions down. She said what Canadians do together now will buy more time to investigate the virus and search for treatments and cures. Trudeau, who presumably is still making his daily appearance inside the, he comes out of his princess bunker where he's been hunkering for several weeks now, even after he was given the go-ahead. What is it, a couple of weeks now? Yeah, 2 weeks ago. He could go back to his wife and kitties, but he decided, for some strange reason, not to. Trudeau said that the modeling described by health officials shows that Canada is in an earlier stage of the outbreak than some other countries, which means this country has a chance to determine how things will look in the weeks and months ahead. Our healthcare systems across the country are coping for the time being, but we're at a fork in the road between the best and worst possible outcomes. The Prime Minister also talked about the staggering job losses, saying the government will keep expanding plans to protect jobs and help both individuals and businesses struggling with the economic fallout linked to the outbreak. Rosemary Parton of the CBC tweeted, Prime Minister makes it clear in French that the country will want some economic activity returned after the first wave, but we have to be vigilant until there is a vaccine. Could be 12 to 18 months. There are things we will be able to do and things we won't. There won't be a Canada if this goes on 12 to 18 months. There simply won't be a Canada. These people are all living in la-la land. The lipped one says models are contrived. They have no sensitivity. Celeste McGovern, hey Celeste, my old friend and co-worker, says 278,000 plus died in 2019. 500 dead now is 0.005% mortality. Ashley Bravo says we got to shut it all down until no one ever gets sick again and takes mandatory vaccines, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci, King of America. Earl Pipe says Trudeau has my Princess Treasure Hoard. The new normal. How I am sick of that. Lecomte de Borras says, oh, I just found news about Justin, Princess Rockstar, saying Canada locked down until vaccine resolved. Celeste sends me a personal message. Call me. Well, I will. Celeste and I worked together in Edmonton at Alberta Report for several years, and she lived in Victoria for several years as well. The lipped one, tell us about Theresa Tam's sexy accent, Kevin. No, I'm not going to go there. Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent. Okay, talk about supposed non-disclosure agreement that Justin Trudeau signed. This was reported by American news outlets during Canada's election last year. It was thought, the Canadian media responded to this, that it was scandalous that anyone in the world should be allowed to comment on these stories. And there was more than a hint that such websites that, I don't know, disturb elite consensus in Canada should be banned. I mean, you know, people can go on the internet, Canada, and they can find stories from all over the world, and that's not really prudent, is it? Jim Smith says, I was at the 3-month mark without a haircut, and it was bugging me so much that I cut it myself. It's a simple haircut, but it's always been biggest problem, the cut hairs. Yeah, they do get everywhere. That is true. Okay, so let's move on to Theatre Thursday. I thought I would start Spectator Life, which is from the London Spectator, has a story today from Melanie McDonough on the best films about faith to watch this Easter. It starts with the Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's 2004 film, which I did not like at all. I didn't see any reason to have the characters speak in Aramaic. You have a situation where the characters literally do not understand the words that they are saying, which, you know, it makes the whole question of acting supererogatory. I thought that the film made a very serious mistake in not attempting to explain why Jesus Christ became a public enemy, such that the torture that he endures up to and including his crucifixion seems gratuitous. The second on this list is Of Gods and Men by Xavier Beauvoir, which I'll be talking about in a few minutes. Third, Silence by Martin Scorsese. I did not like that movie one little bit. Yes, let's say a most unusual Scorsese film, his homage to the novel of that name by the Japanese Shusaku Endo. Shusaku Endo is one of my favorite authors. In a way, it's a failure chiefly because Andrew Garfield doesn't really cut it as the main protagonist, Rodriguez. Yes, terrible miscasting. Andrew Garfield is very good at playing weak men. He is totally unsuited to playing a Jesuit father, missionary priest of the 16th century, because they were the toughest men on earth, who fully expected to be captured, tortured, and then killed. Adam Driver is much better. Yes, he is. They travel to Japan to find their mentor Ferreira, Liam Neeson, who has unaccountably apostatized. But there are some wonderful scenes and terrific performances by the Japanese actors, especially Issei Ogata as Inquisitor. No, I was worried. Martin Scorsese talked for years and years about how he wanted to make his own version of Silence. There was a Japanese version, which you can get from Masters of Cinema, which is far superior to Scorsese's. Scorsese cannot stop himself from sentimentalizing the story. And it doesn't work. It is a exceedingly bleak story. You know, Shusaku Endo talks about Japan as a swamp. That around the time that the persecution started, around 1600, about 20% of Japanese people had become Catholics. And then one day, one of the warlords decided that was it. And so it was stamped out. Next on the list is The Mission by Roland Jaffe from 1986. Melanie McDonough writes, this account of a Jesuit mission in 18th century South America is memorable for its terrific cinematography, notably a Jesuit on a cross sent over a waterfall, and stellar cast including Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons, with screenplay by Robert Bolt. The plot concerns both individual redemption and the way that faith plays out in a fallen world where realpolitik trumps religion and two Catholic powers, Spain and Portugal, fight out their interests through the native tribes people. This movie is based very much on Philip Caraman's wonderful account of the Jesuit kingdom of South America. And I won't go into it. It's just there's a temptation to make the characters more evil than they actually were. Another Robert Bolt script is next, A Man for All Seasons, directed by Fred Zinnemann, which came out in 1966. That is a very good movie, indeed. Yes, very memorable. It's a Wonderful Life, Frank Capra, 1946. Yes, this is everyone's favorite Christmas film, unless you're hard of heart. And it remains the most exuberant affirmation of the worth of every human being, as well as confirmation of the angelic hierarchy explained by Dionysius the Pseudo-Areopagite. Everyone knows this story. I don't know, the Jimmy Stewart's, collapse near the end of the film, particularly the scenes where he is raging against his dear wife, Donna Reed, and his daughter, are exceedingly painful to watch. And one of the things I wonder about this film is, okay, so they have a whip round to save George Bailey. He's the richest man in town. Is everyone going to forget what happened? That he went off his head and started abusing everyone. He told them that he was a loser and that he had wasted his life serving other people. The Song of Bernadette from Henry King in 1943. This is based on the novel by Franz Werfel. That is an excellent film as well. This is a sentimental and charming representation of Bernadette Soubirous, the young French girl whose visions of the Virgin Mary in 1858 led to the finding of the healing springs at Lourdes that pilgrims visit today. It won't appeal to hard-bitten modern viewers, yet it led one man I know, trembling on the brink, to become a Catholic. Sentimental? I don't know. Vincent Price is the main. He plays he's the villain of this. He plays a Freemason, and the Freemasons eventually got their way, and Catholic education, well, the Catholic Church was nationalized in France in 1905. And the last film on the list is Babette's Feast from 1987 by Gabriel Axel. On the face of it, this is about a French refugee from the Franco-Prussian War who's employed by two pastors' daughters in Denmark. When she wins the lottery, she cooks them a feast. If you look just a little harder, you'll find a fabulous metaphor for the Eucharist. I'm surprised that Carl Maria Dreyer's film Ordette is not on this list, since it concerns an actual resurrection. I highly recommend that film. So the film we are talking about today is called Des Hommes et des Dieux, of Gods and Men. It comes from 2010, and it is directed by Xavier Beauvoir, and it stars Lambert Wilson and Michael Lonsdale, with excellent cinematography by Caroline Champartier. And I note that this film had a budget of only 4 million euros. And it shows that you don't need all that much money to make a great film, although certainly the cast in this is rather small. It's based on a true story. There was a monastery, the monastery of Tibrine in the Atlas Mountains in Algeria. And at that time, a terrible civil war was raging through the country. And I should say something about this. There was a man called Sayyid Qutb, whose ideas were the basis of the Muslim Brotherhood. Qutb had studied in the United States, in Colorado, in 1948, which you may think to be a rather innocent time. It was, certainly compared to now. But Qutb was scandalized and disgusted by what he saw there. For instance, the easy familiarity between men and women in American society. What he thought of the indecency of church dances and the like. And he meditated upon this and came to the conclusion that Western or American ideas specifically had poisoned Islam. That Islam was no longer the truth, because it had been corrupted, that it had lost its rigor, and that it was no good proselytizing Muslims because they were living this easy life, this easy westernized Muslim life. And he came to the conclusion that they must be bullied, terrorized, in fact, into becoming true Muslims. And this is the situation that obtained in Algeria in the 1990s. It started in 1991 and mostly petered out by 1997. And a great many people died, 150,000 it is estimated. That the members of the Muslim Brotherhood, they took great pains to kill imams, to kill women without head covering. They wanted to show people that they meant business. Now, this monastery near Tibrine, about 60 miles from Algiers, is a Cistercian or Trappist monastery. And one of the things that you notice from the very beginning of this film is that these are, I suppose you could say, they're liberal monks. The Mass that they celebrate is the New Order Mass. There is communion in the hand. And they make no attempt to spread the gospel amongst the Muslims who live near them. In fact, one of the monks attends a Muslim religious ceremony, circumcision, and takes part in the clapping and the singing. They're very close to the village, and the village is very close to them. When the terror has infected the monastery, there is long discussions in the community about whether they should stay or go. And one of the monks says that we are like birds on a branch, and we don't know when we will leave. And one of the Muslim women says that we are the birds and the monastery is the branch, which gives you an idea of how close they were. That brother Luke, who is a physician, like his namesake, the evangelist, he effectively is the sole man providing medical care to this village. And he treats everyone who comes, regardless of their political positions. And he even treats some of the terrorists who have been wounded. Luke is played by the great actor, Michael Lonsdale, who some of you will remember from Roland, or his great role as the bureaucrat in The Day of the Jackal. That's the first The Day of the Jackal, not the second. Don't watch the second. And Lambert Wilson is, I suppose, best known for his roles in Matrix films. He plays Brother Christian, the leader of the community. And we see him studying the Quran, which turns out to have a practical use, because when terrorists storm the monastery, he says that this is a house of peace and that weapons are not allowed. And so they go outside, past the walls, and they have a discussion. And he quotes the Quran to them. He says, this is a special day. It's Christmas Eve, the eve of the birth of our Savior. And he begins a quote from the Quran, which the terrorist completes. And the terrorist is, they're quite abashed by this. And they leave. But of course, the fear is that they are going to come back, or a different group is going to come back. And it turns out that the terrorist has, in fact, he's issued an order that the monastery is to be spared. This enrages the local police. And of course, well, I'll get to the ambiguity of the ending later. The local police see the monastery as being, fifth columnists, that it's their duty, seeing as they are in Algeria, to support the policies of the government. And Brother Christian does not see it that way. The chief of police goes into a rant, blaming in effect the monks themselves and France. All the problems of Algeria are due to the French colonization. Well, Algeria had been around a long time before the French colonized Algeria. The French were in control of Algeria for, 130 years? And Charles de Gaulle gave the Algerians their independence in 1962, despite the fact that the French had won the war. But I guess, that is always the go-to excuse of failed ex-colonial countries. So I noticed that I just want to read something that Roger Ebert wrote about this film, because I think it's significant. Roger, who tended to be rather spare in awarding stars to prestige films like this one, gave it 3 stars out of 4. And he ends his review in a curious way. He says the most fraught scene comes when terrorists break in on Christmas Eve, demanding that old Luke come with them to care for a wounded comrade. Christian turns them away after quoting from the Koran. Their leader is somewhat unexpectedly convinced. He says the film doesn't raise political questions except in one enigmatic sentence by a local official. It focuses entirely on the nobility of the monks in choosing to stay with their vocation and their duty in the face of quite probable death. Did they make the right choice? In their own idealistic terms, yes. In realistic terms, I say no. They have the ability to help many who need it for years to come. It is egotism to believe their help must take place in this specific monastery. Between the 8 of them, they have perhaps a century of life of usefulness remaining. Do they have a right to deprive those who need it of their service? In doing so, are they committing the sin of pride? I found myself resisting the film's pull of easy emotion. There are fundamental questions here, and the film doesn't engage them. I believe Christian should have had the humility to lead his monks away from the path of self-sacrifice. Well, Roger Ebert was born and raised a Catholic, and he later apostatized. If you look at the reviews of this film, you will find that ex-Catholics and atheists do not think very much of it. So, Roger Ebert, instead of finding this film inspiring, he saw it as I think, as a rebuke to people like him. The Spanish philosopher Miguel de Unamuno said that faith doesn't make martyrs. Martyrs make faith. So if you believe that, and certainly I do, and the evidence seems to be all for it, then the death of these 7 brothers was not a waste. That, all life ends with death, and it is not for us to know the time of our own death. If religious men and women were to take Roger Ebert's advice, all it would take is some threat from any kind of terrorist group for them to depart wherever they minister. Now, the film is austere. This is a slow film. And if you want quick cuts and flashy camera moves, this is not a film for you. This is a deeply immersive experience. We learn the lives of these monks, their daily routine, and it is shown. It's shown over and over again. All of the music in the film is diegetic, that is to say, the plain song of the monks at prayer, except for one scene, the Last Supper, where Brother Bruno has come from France with Christmas gifts for them. He has letters, hosts, and he has cheese as well. And so they have a little banquet, and they drink wine, or some of them drink wine, and they listen to Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. This film has been much criticized for being, this scene has been much criticized for being sappy or corny. I don't think that I'm a particularly sentimental man. I found this scene overwhelmingly moving. So much of the film deals with, as I say, their daily lives. What did they do? Well, these are working monks. They tend animals, they sow crops, and they keep bees to make honey, which they sell in the local market. This is a hard life. And we see them becoming terrorized internally. That the terror begins with some Croatian construction workers with their throats slit. And it comes closer and closer to them such that it is difficult for them to think of anything other than the terror, much as it is today, when it is difficult to think of anything other than this fake terror which has been manufactured by our governments. And the initial decision of Christian is that the community will not leave. And many of the monks remonstrate with him, saying that you did not consult us on this decision. And we see many joint conversations between the monks, and we see many one-on-one conversations between Brother Christian and the various monks, and they are striving to make what they believe is the right decision. Now, of course, they don't know that they're going to be kidnapped and killed by the terrorists, but it seems a very strong possibility. And one by one, they all come to the conclusion that they will stay. They have made a vow, and they are not going to break their vow. They're not going to break their vow to God, and they are not going to break their vow to the community nearby. They are, after the Last Supper, they are taken by terrorists. Two of the monks manage to hide and thus escape. But 7 of them are taken away in a van, and the last scene of the movie, which is a very long shot, we see the priests marching in the snow of the Atlas Mountains. Now, this film was made in Morocco and not Algeria for obvious reasons, but they have the Atlas Mountains in Morocco as well. And we see them trudging through the snow, laboring. They are mostly quite old men, laboring heavily, and we watch them disappear into the fog until they are no longer recognizable. I found this a very deeply moving scene as well, and very beautiful. I singled out the cinematography, which is austere. It's a very austere palette, but it's a naturally austere palette because of the close confines of the monastery. Although, you know, the nature shots are full of color and are beautiful. But this ambiguous ending is appropriate for this film because we don't know what happened to the 7 monks except that they were killed. Now, the armed Islamic group immediately claimed responsibility for the murder of the monks, which happened on May the 21st, 1996. Brother Amadei died in 2008, and at the time of the film's making, Brother Jean-Pierre was still alive at the age of 86. Rumors began to spread that it was not, in fact, the armed Islamic group that had killed the monks, but that it was the Algerian army that had killed them, either by accident or deliberately. We know from the film, and we know from the historical record, that the police in Algeria, the army, they did not think highly of the monastery, believing it to be an aid and comfort to the terrorists. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. In 2008, La Stampa reported that an anonymous high-ranking Western government official based in Algeria at the time of the murders had told them that the kidnapping was orchestrated by a DRS-infiltrated GIA group, but that the monks had been killed accidentally by an Algerian military helicopter which attacked the camp where they were being held captive. In July 2009, the retired French General Francois Buchwalter, who was military attaché in Algeria at the time, testified to a judge that the monks had been accidentally killed by an Algerian government helicopter during an attack on a guerrilla position, then beheaded after their death to make it appear as though the GIA had killed them. The day after Buchwalter's statement, former GIA leader Abdelhak Layada, who was in prison when the monks were killed, responded by reiterating the claim that the GIA had beheaded the monks after a breakdown of negotiations with the French Secret Service. The 7 monks of the Our Lady of the Atlas who were kidnapped and later beheaded were beatified with 12 other martyrs of Algeria in 2018. And that celebration occurred in Oran, Algeria. No, this is a movie about duty, and it's about sacrifice, and those are not very popular qualities these days. I mean, we are not all chosen to be priests or monks or otherwise religious, but this is a rare movie which actually takes religion seriously. I mean, most movie reviewers, most intellectuals believe religion to be a joke at best. And I believe this is a movie which can be fully appreciated by people who have no religious feelings, as I say, because it is about duty and sacrifice. I mentioned the cinematography being unflashy. We get a lot of very slow pans around a table, and the focus being on the faces of the monks. The 8 at first monks, and then later 9 after Brother Bruno joins them. These are hommes sérieux. These are serious men. And one has to thank the director for the excellent casting. They fully embrace the look of seriousness one would expect from such men. And of course, this is a movie that could hardly be made in Hollywood. You know, where's the star quality? Where are the young hunks? These are, the actors look like men who have had long, hard lives. They look like men who have spent a great deal of time meditating on the Christian religion and their own role in it. I think this is an outstanding film, certainly one of the greatest films that has ever been made on the subject of religion. All care has been taken for historical accuracy in the lives of these men. They were trained to sing plainsong. Everything about it is correct, so far as we know. And these are men who have essentially exiled themselves from the world. But we see most powerfully in this film the community that they have formed, how they are truly brothers to each other, and how, you know, we see in the discussions among the monks about whether they will leave or not. You know, one sees clearly that they view leaving the monastery not only breaking vows with God, breaking vows to the village, but also breaking vows to each other. I mean, there is no pressure put on any of them to stay. They all come to this decision on their own. I wanted to quote from Peter Bradshaw's review in The Guardian, which I thought was quite well. He says, of Gods and Men strives for simplicity. Cinema is usually about dynamism, attraction, ego, but this movie concerns the renunciation of these things in art and life. But it is also about the question of how to act when this life is violently challenged. The one visual flourish Beauvoir permits himself is a shot of a dead jihadist murdered by his comrades. The foreshortened image is held on screen long enough for the audience to register its resemblance to Mantegna's Christ. Of course, this is a fictional account of a real-life event. Audiences are entitled to wonder if Beauvoir is too respectful of the monks and their lives, and further wonder if this account is tendentious or even propagandist. I can only say I found it thrillingly audacious, moving, and real. See it for yourself. See if you can withstand the swan-like sequence. I couldn't. And it's been pointed out that the film, the shot of the dead jihadist is actually taken from a film by Pier Paolo Pasolini, which was his homage to Mantegna's Christ. You know, it is really refreshing and a delight to watch a film which attempts to present life as it is, and life is full of much silence, much slowness, much, you know, one day being much like the next. A movie that allows the viewer to immerse himself in it. And I'll just conclude by saying that I think one becomes, at least for a short while, a better person for having watched Gods and Men. So I'm going to go to the chat here for the last time. The Lift One says, I'm developing a Botox alternative based on coronavirus, totally non-toxic, and I'm willing to give it to celebrities for free. Yeah, I just, when I found out that, famous people or beautiful people were having botulism injected into their skin, I thought, wait a minute, isn't botulism a deadly poison? Josh Randall says, my new handle, Madonna in a milk bath with rose petals and a manservant playing piano, respect her. Walrus Libertarian says, don't use Jim Goat's ketchup, he will explode. Yeah, all right. Lacomte Brea says, after 1,000 subscribers, PayPal doesn't like the incognito culture. I don't really know what that means. So I'll scroll down to the end here. Ashley Bravo says, worship the almighty vaccine, for without it we are mere sinners destined for eternal damnation. We must pray for the grace and forgiveness of the all-knowing one, Dr. Fauci. So that's the show for Thursday. My choices for Theater Thursday and the book club on Friday were, they are Holy Week, or appropriate for Holy Week. Tomorrow I will be discussing Evelyn Waugh's biography of Edmund Campion, who was a Jesuit priest and martyr. Evelyn Waugh, I suppose, is best known for his comic novels, but he traveled the world widely, and he wrote about that. Of course, he wrote many belles lettres, but he also did serious work, non-comic work as well. And Edmund Campion is an outstanding example of that. So I will be back on the air Friday, tomorrow, at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time and 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate if you would click the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you wish to contribute to the broadcast, my PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And I wish you all a good night. And I will say once again, most sincerely, I hope you all manage to find community in this time of panic. Good night.